Hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to present Dion McCormick, no relation, who is our lead solutions engineer, along with Sarah Mitchell, who is in charge of our documentation department. Together, we are here to answer your questions, and Dion is going to be starting off with a quick presentation. I believe today's presentation is going to be on reporting and custom data sources. So if you have questions, go ahead and type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. So let's get started. Hello, Dion, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. I'm going to make you the presenter, and
All
there's your screen.
right. Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Mid-September, Big Ten football is now a go, so things are kind of going back to normal. It's nice to see a lot of college football out there and things like that, and they're doing a nice, safe way, so that's exciting. But we are very heads down busy. Not a lot of time to watch football because we're preparing for DevCon 2020, which is just around the corner. Let me go ahead and jump over to my web browser here and got a couple of quick announcements. First, there we are. If you go to Alpha Software DevCon 2020, if you have not signed up, sign up. It's going to be awesome. We were just reviewing all the content today, tying up a lot of loose ends. We still are like cranking out stuff to be prepared for there, but the agenda is going to be awesome, and it's going to have both really good information about existing capabilities, some of the newer capabilities, but also sneak peeks and information about new capabilities coming in the Alpha platform, and also Transform, which is very, very exciting from that standpoint. So if you haven't signed up, get over there. It's a virtual event. It's going to be coming up next month, only a few weeks away, and we're very excited about what we're presenting, and I think you're going to find it really valuable, especially since you don't have to spend money on plane tickets and hotels and stuff like that. So have a very safe, productive, and phenomenal virtual event. So go there, get signed up, and we look forward to seeing you at the event there. Also, we have another quick announcement that is new release. A new release has just been put up on the server. This is build 70405530, basically the 15th of September release. You can also download all of it. Remember, when you do install, make sure your dev system is in sync with your server, so nothing bad will happen if you go to publish. So you have to make sure everything is in sync on that. And as you can see, they bring the download page has all of these here along with it. Now, out of curiosity, Dave, I think the new installer will actually grab the newest release. I think it's one of the cool things we've worked on. I have to double check and verify that. But the new installer, if you keep it on your system, you can actually use the new installer to reinstall with the latest version because it goes up and grabs that. So pretty cool stuff. Trying to just make your life a little simpler. But you can always go here, click the download, bring it down, and you'll be good to go. Now, a couple quick notes on that. You can click release notes. It's primarily a bug release version, meaning a lot of little stuff was kind of cleaned up. A huge amount of features have been added in the last 6 months. And so we just want to go in and make sure everything's good. But there are a couple cool little new features. One, which is how to add badges to buttons. So let me give you a little visual of what that looks like. So now you can have little badges, which are really powerful because it actually enhances, I call it the information density. So you may have a icon on your user interface and you want to show like an update, like how many messages this person came from, like a chat application or something like that. So it's really fun and it's really easy to do, and it's built into this release, number of other programming things. But also one thing I'm very excited about is a new PDF viewer control. And now, very important, you do need a feature key. So when you install it, put in your feature key and read the release notes. But this is a cool viewer, and let me go down, and I think we have a picture of it here. Where is the picture of that? Nope, that must be here. Anyway, it allows you to drop a control on your UX and then show PDFs in it. Now, you've had that capability before. Specifically, you would put it into a iframe or and setting a iframe source property, which is good, but sometimes iframes just aren't very nice. I mean, it's kind of an old technology methodology, really frowned on in a lot of days because of security issues and things like that. So now we have this viewer control, and when you drop it on there, excuse me, it shows your PDF, it has all the controls in it. So what's really nice is it gives you more control over, no pun intended, how to integrate it into your user experience. And so this, along with the image viewer capability within it, allows you to kind of show the user all this stuff without having downloaded, open up new tabs and things like that. So again, not a ton of new features, a few code things, but a lot of cleanup behind the scenes, stability aspects, and now these two new capabilities. So check it out, it is available. And also what's nice is that if you're on Alpha Cloud, these things are already there. You can just redeploy your application up on the cloud and point to the new version and you'll be good to go. So really fun stuff there. So as Dave mentioned, we are here for you. In fact, you can go ahead and go to the Q&A section of your GoToWebinar control panel, put your questions in there. Dave and Sarah will be checking those out and we will try to get to as many as possible today. Also, remember, you can send things to guides@alphasoftware.com. And again, the content today was driven by that. We actually had a follow-up from last week's presentation on reporting, which was kind of a high-level intro, kind of different types of reports. Get over, use those table layout reports. Those are really handy. But I had mentioned that there's a feature built into Alpha. And let me jump over to my presentation here. Go to my reporting. So, a quick recap, you could do reporting with different capabilities, list, control, view box, but the Alpha report builder. So I kind of focused on the report builder. And we mainly focused a lot on the table layout report because that's such a very flexible way to present data, especially in a mobile or a desktop web browser. It's a way to go. But I also want to talk and follow up on data sources. As I went through last week, I mentioned there are 3 primary data sources you can get data for your Alpha reports. One is SQL data sources, and that is a SQL connection string of any kind. You can also connect directly to Alpha Transform, so you can take Alpha Transform data and bring them into your reports. And last but not least is it's custom, or what I like to call code. You can actually have, instead of going to one of those other sources, you can actually write a little Xbasic and generate data for your report. And in fact, I want to dive into that a little bit more. I had a couple of different questions on that. And so I wanted to go ahead and do an intro to it to kind of show you how you can do it because it's extremely powerful. One of the coolest things about it is that because you can go to code, there's no inherent limitations on the report builder as to what it can connect to. You essentially open up the universe of the world to be able to connect to any kind of data source, whether it's another SQL database, and maybe you have to do a bunch of manipulations before that happens. Maybe you want to connect it to an API, like a third-party tool, and bring data in, then use our report builder to do data off that API. That's doable. And anything else, you can actually just write your own, create your own data inside your own function and return it back. Maybe it's doing some interesting calculations or doing some other things like that. Instead of making your report really complicated with a whole bunch of calculations and other stuff, you can leverage this technique to really simplify your report management aspects. So I'm going to do a quick demonstration of how to do this today and talk about some of the nuances that are associated with that. And as I do that, I would like to make sure that if you have any questions, go to the Q&A, put them in there. We'll get to them as soon as possible. Before I jump into it, any other things, Dave, that I missed or things I should chat
We
about?
are good. I think we're ready for the presentation and for some questions afterwards. So I think today's going to be a great session. Yep.
Yep. So I'm jumping into my Alpha development environment, and I am at the Web Projects Control Panel. And down here, we have our reports section. So where we were last time, I'm in the reports section, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new report. So I click New Report, and it immediately asks me what kind of content am I going to go to? What is my data source? So as we showed last week, SQL data source, that's probably most of the time you're going to be using that. I'd say, 95% of the time. But if you're using also Transform, you can go right to Transform there. And this one is what we're going to focus today, which is called custom data source. Now, down below, we had our different report types. So I'm going to basically just use the quick report as a good starting point for this because I really want to focus more on the data source and not so much on the actual report engine itself. So we can just quickly show how those pieces go. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So first thing it's going to do is bring up a little control panel so I can tell it, well, how am I going to build this data source? I mean, essentially, as we mentioned here, basically the report engine goes after and runs some code that generates the data for the reports. Thus, that code then can reference external capabilities. So you'll see we have we really have one option, Xbasic. The idea down the road is that, if we eventually integrate more Python or Node capabilities, you'll be able to drop right into that. But at this time, Xbasic is your primary there. So function name, now what's interesting about this is we're going to define this function locally, but what's kind of cool is you can, create your own functions like in Xbasic classes and other stuff. So you can centralize how your data is being generated for the report. But I'm going to go ahead and put in here sample data, and that's going to be called the function name. Now I'm going to go ahead and click here, and this allows you to enter it, but also I want here, and after I put in the function name, I'm going to click here to show a sample Xbasic function prototype. And this is important because Alpha is expecting this function to return information in a very specific way, or and if that doesn't work, then it'll create bad things. So I'm going to go ahead and click here, and I'm going to go ahead and look in here, and you'll see it's already created a function prototype using the name I gave it. So it's ready to go. And if I scroll down to the bottom, you can see that there's some sample data already built. So it's kind of nice. I don't even have to actually go out and figure out how to code this. It actually gives me some code, and then I can work from there. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that to the clipboard. So now I have it on there. Now I'm going to go ahead and put in local Xbasic definition because I want to actually include it right here. But often what I do is I want to call out and use like Xbasic classes and other things like that to centralize it, because then it's easier to manage over time. I don't always have to open up the report to edit my function. I can do that. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to paste that code right here. So notice I'm just taking and pasting the code I just created, or the system created for me. It's got the name of it. It's returning the data as C, or character. And you'll see in our case, we're returning it in a delimited fashion. So you'll see, and I'll go into this a little bit more, but here is your header row, and then here is your data rows, and you'll see it's using the vertical bar or pipe character as the delimiter. So I'll click OK. And notice here the field delimiter, if you don't like that, there's a lot of flexibility. You can change it from there. Now, very important, this is the delimited format, so it's using this kind of traditional there. But another very powerful way is you can return the data as JSON. And I got to tell you, I like JSON. I would move towards JSON, and here's the reason why. Guess what most APIs return to you? JSON. Guess what Alpha does? It has a whole bunch of commands that will allow you to query external data sources and return it as JSON. So now you don't have to do all that formatting. So I'm going to actually go ahead and click JSON here. I'm going to click this here, and you'll notice that it's generated a different function prototype using this information here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this here because I really want to focus on JSON because that's the better way to go. So I'm going to select all this here, delete it, and paste it in here. So very similar concept. And so I'm going to click OK, and then we're going to come in and explore that a little bit more. And I'm going to come back and talk about arguments in a minute from here. So again, I'm using export it. I give it the name of a function. I tell it whether I want it to be JSON or delimited. I would prefer JSON because, again, it'll make your life easier. The bottom line is potentially you can make an API call and then just take that information and give it right back from the function, and you're done. No manipulation necessary. I'm actually defining the function here using what's called a local Xbasic function declaration. So that way I'll be part of this report. And then I'm going to come back to arguments in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And notice something happened here. And we'll go back and look at why this happened. You're going to see right here that I have fields that are available. So when I open this report, it actually ran that function. And from the data came back, it inferred what were the data elements or fields available to you. So as you can see, now everything is the same in terms of your report writer. You can just pick the ones you want. You can preview it. You can edit it. Notice there's the sample data in here. You can go in and do groupings, report settings, all the things I talked about last week. You can do it. And we're not limited to a quick report. This can be a free form. It can be a table layout. It's really up to you. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to call this, let's call it custom data source underscore quick report. Dynamite. Now, let's say I want to edit my information. Well, I can go up here and I can view the definition. Now, this is important to understand is I can go up here, I can click refresh data, and it's going to run that Xbasic command again. So let's say I'm doing this live from something, I can refresh that data and get a new updated version of the data for my report building. So remember, it grabs the report data, puts it into there so I can start manipulating it, doing previews and stuff like that. So if you ever need to refresh it, you can always get that information there. Now the next, I'm going to click here and view the definition, and this tells you what the definition of it is from that standpoint. And I haven't edited it. Let's do an edit here and see if that works. It might break, but let's try that. Usually I have to get out, but maybe this is a newer way to handle it. So you'll notice we have first name, last name, company, and age. And when I do a preview, we've got Fred, John, Smith, Jones, etc. Ages 30 and 23. So I'm going to go up here to the report, data source, view definition, and I want to see yeah. So you can see what it's doing is, in this case, it's just some hard-coded information. Now, notice here it only has first name, last name. We're not actually returning that. We're returning this one right here. So let's see if we can expand. Oh, it's hard to expand it there. But you'll notice we have a schema, and I'll talk a little bit that, and then the data right here. And this one's example with schema. Here's with sub-objects, like if you have parent-child stuff, it handles that. And then this one's with data, with images, so it shows you that. And then if I go to the very bottom, you can see which version of that. So it generates all 4 versions of code to send back to the report for sample data, but it's telling me which one it's actually done is that example with schema, and then it returns that data. So I'm going to actually go back up to where it says example with schema, and I'm going to go Fred 1, 2, 3, John 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to click OK. I'm going to go to the report. I'm going to go data source and refresh the data. And let's go ahead and see. Yeah, see, I think this, and I was kind of concerned with that, is that I hadn't played with it, but if we go back to the view definition and scroll down, yeah, it doesn't save it. So this allows you to view it, but it doesn't allow you to actually edit. So the way you do that is this. I click save. I'm going to go ahead and close this report. I'm going to go here back to my custom data source. I'm going to right click on it. So I'm right clicking on it. I'm going to go data source, edit data source definition. Then I'm going to go up here and go into the function name, and I'm going to go into the local Xbasic definition. Now I'm in my editor. So let's go ahead and make that change real quick. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, click OK. I'm going to save it. Now let's reopen it, and let's do a preview, and notice my data is updated. So one of the challenges, and this I want you to be aware of, anytime I need to kind of change how this report works, maybe I'm adding some new columns and stuff, I have to kind of get out of the report editor, and I have to go here and go to data source, edit it, and edit the function here, and off to the races. So here's the strategy. I want to make your life much easier. The way to do this is go ahead and declare this function, but then what you do is you go over to your Xbasic here, click new, and create like an Xbasic class, and in that class, generate that JSON data. Then once you have that class set up and running, go back to your report editor, edit the definition, go into this here, and what you can do is just say, okay, where it says data equals this, you could literally just put in the name of your function and run the function. Now, the benefit of that is that whenever you want to change how the kind of this report works, not from a layout standpoint, you can just go to your Xbasic, modify it here, do some testing, because you can test it all here, and then go back into your report and work with it there. So that's a better way to go, especially if you have something more complex. It's just easier to manage that code in an Xbasic class, test it in that aspect, and go from there. So I want to show you a couple other elements of it which are important, but that's the basic concept, is that you define, and we'll go ahead and show you the definition. You defined a report or a function. The report returns character string, and that character string can be either, in this case, JSON, or it can be comma or delimited with using the pipe character as the default. It's up to you. You can pick whichever you like, although I do definitely like to go from there. Along with that, which is very powerful, is that you'll notice that we have a specific structure here, very important. You'll notice my data here is the actual data that gets returned from this function. But you'll notice here schema, this you can pass in too. Now this is very handy because the report writer is kind of, for better like, it's kind of dumb. If you're using a SQL database, it can realize what the field types are. But if you give it some JSON, there's not much it can do. So what you can actually do to help the report writer out is you can give it information telling it what kind of type it is. So notice this is a type character. How wide is it? Age, this is numeric, like date and stuff like that. So now the report writer understands not only the data, but the kind of data it is. So when you start using the report writer, it says, oh, okay, that's a date field. Okay, I'll give you the date field formatting options for that. Or, oh, it's numeric, so I know how to handle that as a number. So if I do a total off it, it's going to work correctly. And so you're responsible for generating this information, but as you can see, pretty straightforward. Basically, you create the schema, which are your columns, and then your data, and you can do that within the system. And again, that's why when you start getting into that stuff, it's often much easier just to do that in Xbasic Class. Return this JSON right here from the Xbasic Class, and then all you have in this function is basically think of it as a stub or a wrapper that calls the outside function there. Now, as I mentioned, we can guide the system. So first, we can give it different types of fields so it understands what fields that are available. Notice also we can do things like sub-objects. So this allows us to do parent-child kind of structuring of data, which is really handy. So you'll notice here we have a name and a company and address. And the address is actually a sub-item here. So let's say we go in there, you could have multiple addresses, this kind of scenario here. So it really is handy for more complex data structures, which you may have going against outside APIs. The outside APIs might give you nested information. And again, what you can do, which is important, is you can give it the schema so that the report writer understands how to consume that data. I haven't spent much time with sub-objects. Most of my time has really been here with a pretty straightforward schema. The real reason I've been using it mainly is to call APIs and just say, hey, give me a list of customers from this API, or give me a list of accounts or something like that. And usually it's a sort of a single level kind of structure in terms of the report. So I haven't had to deal with like heavy duty sub-objects and things like that, but the system can handle that. Now, one other thing I want to do is go down here. We can also handle image data. So this shows you how to handle image data in terms of you give it like image, type, etc. Here's the data that goes back. I think this is actually giving you, this would be like raw data. And again, I'm not going to do much, but basically this would actually be the data. And the reality is most external APIs kind of return at this value. This may be super long. Because it's a base 64 encoded image that you might want to do on it. So the beauty of that is that you can grab these external images off external systems, and then in your report writer, it'll actually understand that that data item is a image, and therefore when you're manipulating it in the report writer, it just treats it like an image coming out of the database or whatever. Very straightforward there. But again, be careful if you enable this. This is not valid data. You would actually need to put in there some image information. Notice this is data image base 64. This is IB, I don't even know what that is. IBBORW, blah, blah, or maybe that's just maybe this is the base 64 string. So you can play with that, and there's just different methods for doing that there. One last thing I'd like to cover before we leave off this is that often when you're doing reports, let me go ahead and grab one of these other reports like right here and edit that data source definition. Whoa, that's interesting. That's really an interesting. I've never ever seen that.
Wow, that's a new one for me too. Wow.
I know. Did not like my operating system. Well, so no problem. Restart. Bear with me.
Will do.
Yeah, something doesn't like it. Just went off in La La Land. Come on. Bear with me. I'm just gonna restart there.
Mhm.
To send. Sorry, oh, we were so close. I just want to
I know
cover what's
someone is
called.
chiding you. Someone is
Yeah.
chiding you for not using. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So
Someone's
there it
chiding you for not using a proper PP.
is. It is a proper. It's a heavy duty virtual machine, pal. So
It's a vert. Come on.
come on, I'm trying to just end this thing. End it. End task. There we go. Huh, it doesn't like that. Let me see if I can just reopen. I only had one other quick thing I wanted to do, but wanted to be
Sure.
very okay. When in doubt, just reopen a new instance and have it blow up there.
There you go.
Okay. So when you create a report, and I'll go ahead and just go into this and edit this data for us, you can create what are called arguments. And those are really powerful because you can pass in essentially variables or arguments that can then be used by your report to filter your data. And that's really nice because you don't have to create like a big long SQL thing in the back end. You can create a report and say, pass in like a region ID. And then in the report, it would limit that report to that region ID. You basically build the query in the report itself. Well, the custom data source accepts that same concept. So you can create and pass in arguments. Then in your code, you can use that argument. So let's go ahead and go and edit the data source, go into my code, and you'll notice that you can refer to that argument because when this Xbasic script runs, at the runtime, the alpha system passes in those arguments saying, oh, hey, I want you to run this report. You go grab the data. By the way, here's some arguments. And then in that, I can use that information. Let's say it's what country. And then in my code, I can pass that to my Xbasic function, or in here, I can go ahead and use that to say, pass it to an API or something else from there. So you can use these arguments to help create very powerful reports because you basically can pass them in, predefine them, and then use that information in your code to then tailor the operation. So traditionally, those arguments are usually passed into like a SQL command, like what country? Okay, so I'm gonna do by country code. Country code. But what could be very cool is that with this methodology, arguments are even more powerful because you can refer to the arguments and run a whole different set of code to generate data in one case versus the other. So it's really infinitely flexible in terms of how you can use this Xbasic code to generate the data that you need. And you're never going to run into a situation where you can't generate it. The only area you have to just be careful is make sure you give it a schema so the report editor kind of understands what to do. The only other thing you have to be a little wary of is that you'll notice this is pretty hard-coded code. So if I refer, the only thing I've found is that sometimes sometimes and I'm not sure, you probably want to pass this in as an argument, but if you had referred to a session variable or something in here, you got to be a little careful that when you go into the editor is running kind of in working preview, not live. So sometimes I've put checks in here saying, if I'm live, go ahead and run the full code. If not, just pull back some sample data that I know what it looks like. And therefore, it actually works pretty nice. So again, it's sort of like a development issue of be careful if you write a bunch of code and it's dependent on an environment running in a certain way. When you go into the editor, it's going to try and run that code. And if that code doesn't have everything it needs to execute and give you back the data, you may have to go in there and write a little debugging code in there to say, oh, for temporarily, I know what I'm going to get back. So all I'm going to do is kind of hard code this. And so I'll let it return some hard coded sample data. So when I'm building my report, I don't have to worry about hitting an external system. Maybe it takes a little while to run, it may get a little cumbersome. So you can say, okay, for now, run this hard coded and return this. Go ahead and work in your report environment, do what you need to do. Then turn on your real code, do some testing and verify the data syncs up, and you go from there. So that's just a little word to the wise kind of as you start getting into it. I often start by creating hard-coded. That way I can focus on the report design. Then I go in and rev it to include the actual calls to external systems and things like that that require, maybe more coding and stuff to be done. But the nice thing too is that if you've kind of done a pre-design, you can literally have your reports running before you even have your backend sources running, just to be able to develop them, show and do things like that, get approval. Then you go in and flesh out the code to actually generate the real data that comes back in there. So that is custom data sources, super flexible, almost infinitely able to do anything. You again can do very complex SQL stuff that you may want to have a hard time in the regular editor. You can go against APIs, which is what I'm using it more and more these days since the world's going to APIs. And again, anything else, the sky's the limit. You can, with your creativity. So that's the Alpha Report Builder.
Very, very cool. So quick question. So you were showing how to use arguments to set up your custom data source. You can pass them in and use them in variables in your Xbasic script.
Correct.
The question is, how do you call, like, let's say you have a UX and you want it to open a report or run a report and you want to pass in some arguments. How do you do that? Is there?
Good question.
All right.
And let's go here to webinar report. I already had this running from last week.
All right.
So these are pre-made buttons that are running the open or email a report label or letter layout. So that's a built-in action JavaScript command that's available. So I'm going to go in there and you give it the report name or the report name and the initial view, whether it's like PDF or HTML. But you'll notice down here, you'll get argument bindings. And in here, when you open that up, if there are arguments on the report, they will show up. And then you can bind them to session variables. You can bind them to fields on your user interface. It really is open from there. And that's why I like arguments, because,
very cool.
Because I kind of have a preset saying, hey, if you're going to run this, this is what I expect of this report. Then this action JavaScript will give the tool to the developer to then tie those report elements to things on the UX or other places they're going to get data from there. Now, technically, you could go ahead. Oh man, yeah. See, something's really up on here. Technically, I'll have to go ahead and restart it. But you could pass in a SQL filter, which then filters the data in the report. But I find that's very flexible and in certain scenarios. But I tend to like to do things with arguments because arguments just are just tend to be a little bit more stable from how that goes. So.
Terrific. Thanks very much.
You got it.
In one of your examples, once you get this back up and running again,
oh yeah,
one of your preview had the age column clipped. I guess someone was watching you do the preview there, and we're wondering how do you sort of fix that? So it was just the column label that was clipped. I think it said AG and maybe part of the E was showing or something.
Oh,
like
good
that.
point. Yeah, the final one there. Okay. So we'll go ahead and go in here.
Look at you with all those virtual machines at the ready. Very nice, Dion.
I know.
Very
So
nice.
with here, so if we preview it, I think what they're noticing is this is
where's that
flipped
ego?
off right
Yeah,
there.
exactly. I
That's
want my
a good
E.
point. So with here is the width. So that would clip the data itself. The reality is what I'd do is I'd take that and I'd put it into a layout table report and then adjust the width using this, as we kind of showed last week.
And
so
you showed
now
us
I
how
have
to do that
completely
last week, right? How to translate that quick report into it.
Once you have your quick report, you just click this open in a report editor.
Right.
And then you can pick the type of it, and you can either open this one, so it'll destroy the quick report and recreate it with this, or you can open a copy of it, which is what I use, which creates a whole new report, and thus preserving my original quick report if I need to go back and do anything.
Excellent. Okay, so you were also talking about using JSON data instead of just delimited data, which makes sense because you get JSON data back from the APIs and things like that. Do you happen to know what format we use for the JSON? Is it just YYYMMDD, or is it a special JSON date format?
So that accepts just normalized JSON or regular JSON formatting. That's a really good point. There are a number of, and let me go ahead and go here.
If I recall, JSON, there is no specific standard for JavaScript, but there are some standards that people tend to use, right?
Yeah. Okay. So, and that's actually really good. And this is a little off topic, but it's somewhat related, is that let's go, actually, I want to do JSON generate. So there is just industry standard JSON, which we support, which is kind of nice, so using the date formats and everything else that's associated with it. But Alpha also has kind of its own capabilities. So you'll notice there's two functions here called JSON generate and property to JSON. JSON generate is what I normally use, but very important, it may not actually be truly valid JSON. This generates JSON that is Alpha likes, because Alpha can kind of infer certain information from it. So again, you can use either one, but I tend to use this JSON generate, but I've had situations where I've generated JSON. So what this does is it takes a pointer variable and turns it into its equivalent for JSON. And that's usually how I work it. I create a pointer variable, load it up, generate the JSON, send it off. When I get back the JSON, I take it, put it back into a pointer variable, because it's really easy to manipulate. But there's a second function here that you should be aware of called property to JSON. And this does like, it doesn't do as much as JSON generate, but out of this, you get a clean set of JSON, which is more industry standard. And that's, again, called property to JSON here. Again, the JSON generate, as it notes here, is it allows you to do full round trip of data. So it does some other little things that allows it to understand that when you create a pointer, turn it into JSON, then return it, that pointer will be identical to the one you created. If you use like this, you may lose a little of the information because it's going to just pure JSON kind of scenario. So actually, let's check here. Let's get JSON date field, data field, date field. And just to, on here, I'd have to check into it. We accept just the
format that you're
2020.
there. The format you're showing there is one that I'm fairly familiar with, which has got the Z for the time zone and stuff in there. I believe it's all supported. Yeah.
Alpha, though, if I go back here, let's go to Xbasic script dim p as pointer p.date p.date as d. Then I can just go p and then go p.date is equal to today, or no, date, and I'll go show, let's see, JSON generate p. Sorry, it's probably boring for some people. I'm curious what it comes out with here, and then I'll say show var JSON. So basically I'm creating a pointer, I'm loading that, I'm defining it as a date and loading it. And so now, type not define. There we go. Huh. Line 1, D. Oh, P.
ESP.
There we go. Okay, so that's how it's going to generically create it, which is similar to regular JSON. So, but notice, okay, this is important. I want to show you that this is kind of the whole point of it. Notice what it says here, date parentheses. And the reason why is that if I take this and I do what's called a JSON parse, it'll turn it back into a date field. But if I go in here and I do, let's look at this, let's go, and again, this is important because you should be doing a lot more API stuff. This is all for there. So we'll go pointer to JSON, is that right? Property to JSON. Go there. You'll notice that, it doesn't have that date stuff, but it does have the sort of same more. So very subtle difference, but the important thing is that if you took the previous JSON and sent it to another thing, it may get confused because it goes, what's this date thing in front of it? I don't get it. But if you want pure JSON that can be accepted by other things, you would use this property JSON. And then when you sent that to there, this is what would show up, or that then it would be able to accept it because this looks like just industry standard JSON. And that's tripped me up where I've been trying to call an API, I create a pointer, I turn it into JSON, submit it, and it says, oh, I don't like it, I don't like it, I don't like it. And then I use property to JSON, submit it, and it likes it. So something to be aware of it. As far as when you're doing your report stuff, you can just use, JSON, the JSON generate and stuff like that, because it's all within the alpha system. So it's going to understand all that information.
Excellent. Thanks very much. So someone has pointed out that, well, we typically do web and mobile examples here. On the desktop side, you can also create reports. You can create both free-form reports and layout table reports. The question is, if you end up creating a report in one, is it possible to move it over to the other? Let's say you built a desktop report and you said, wow, this would be cool to have this in my as part of my web project. So I actually want to publish it up to my
And the answer is
application.
yes.
Okay.
If I create a report, I'm back in the original control panel and create that report. Again, you got to be careful about, what's its data source and things like that. In the
Sure.
report editor over here, you can do, let's see, I think it's right click here. Actually, I think when you're on the report here, you can right click on it and it will say, turn it into a type of report that can be used here. So definitely you can upsize your reports from desktop to web using that methodology, because you can't run these in the web browser. You can run these. So you have to if you're going to do stuff in the web from desktop, you have to do that conversion.
Very cool. Hold on one moment. Okay, so another question, and this is not report related. It has to do with dropdowns. This person is creating a, looks like a grid, but they asked if they said a UX might be okay also in the example. And they want to have two dropdowns. And the first dropdown should define what the choices are in the second dropdown. So for example, if I chose the country, or let's say the state of Texas, I'd want to see just the cities in Texas in my second dropdown. How do you go about filtering a second dropdown so that it only shows you choices based on the first one?
You got it. Actually, the nice thing is it's kind of built into Alpha.
Cool.
Let's go ahead and create a new UX here. And we'll go to controls. We'll go ahead and so I'll go ahead and put in here. Let's go ahead and save this. We'll go, in case my thing blows up again, linked drop down. Blah, blah, blah. Go to properties. Project style should be good. Okay, so I'll go here. I'm going to go ahead and create a drop-down box. I'll go drop down 1 and drop down 2. I'm actually creating 2 separate drop-down boxes. So first one, let's go ahead and we'll use our current data structure. So I'm going to go to choices here, and I'm going to go ahead and use a dynamic because I want to grab it from the database. You could use other methods you want, either static, you could type your stuff in there directly, or variable, but this works nicely. So we'll go ahead and Northwind. We'll go ahead and select from the customer table. Oh, geez, something's going on here. Ooh, this is bad. Bad. It doesn't, something is amiss on my virtual machine, guys, and I am so sorry about that. This may be a little tough to, I'll point to how I would do it. I'm gonna have to kind of work around it.
Okay.
And I do apologize on that. So let's go ahead and close all the windows. Yeah, it's just something, maybe it's I did do an update, so it's possible the OS update threw things off. No excuse, Dion.
I thought you were going to come prepared, man.
I know. This is bogus.
This is bogus.
This whole presentation is bogus. You're out of order.
Someone had asked earlier on, you were pointing out the badge notification thing about, they asked whether or not, could you make that badge notification thing flash, like that little number and stuff? And I think you can probably handle that using a CSS transform. But if you'd like us to explore it further, send us an email to guides@alphasoftware.com. We could probably puzzle that one through and figure out how to make that work.
Let's see if we can get far enough into it that it doesn't float chunks. Nope, there's something up, and I think it has to like maybe my driver.
Connect to the SQL table.
Yeah, it's trying to connect to the data. I'm glad we didn't do a database report generation thing today. That would have been bad. Yeah, slow us down. But let me talk to that so you can see where it's at. So I'm going to go in here, and we'll go ahead and load up our thing here. So I'll create my first dropdown and connect it to my database source. So maybe it's a list of cities from a table. Then I'll go to my second dropdown and I'll go into my choices here and I'll make it dynamic. But this is where the magic occurs. I'm going to connect it to my database, but notice there's something here called cascading choices. So what this means is I can enable that. Then I can look at my parent control. So I can actually say, go to dropdown 1, watch dropdown 1, and then I can tell it how to filter my information. So this would be my generic call, like let's say I had a list of countries and cities. So the first dropdown would be, just give me the countries and the country code. Then this second dropdown would be maybe a second table that has country code, city, and city code. So my data source here, I'd go through and I'd set it up to return the city and the city code. But then down here, I would say do cascading choices and then watch dropdown 1 and perform an extra filter based on limiting it by that country code. So that's built into it. So the cool thing is when you do the dropdown 1, it automatically refreshes the dropdown of dropdown 2 because it's going to fire off, get the data from the database, do a filter based on what it finds in dropdown 1. And you'll see there are different methods you can use. So you can either auto, let it guess that, and that usually works pretty well, but you can also go in here explicitly and put in exactly how, and this shows you, it says like country name equals value in country, etc. So this walks you through it here. But that's how you would create related dropdowns, meaning you have a parent-child relationship, and you would use this cascading choices. The benefit of the cascading choices, once you have it set up, you don't need to mess with it. It will automatically trigger the cascading. So if you modify dropdown 1, it will automatically refresh dropdown 2 to show you what is available based on dropdown number 1. It's really handy, very easy and nice to use, and I find very, very handy. You could also do it programmatically. There is some ways you can do through JavaScript a on-the-fly population of drop-down information, but obviously that's a lot more code, and so it would be a lot more work to do that than just using this cascading choice functionality.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one has to do with where Xbasic functions are kept, and we're getting into modules and libraries and things like that. So the question is, I think in the past, maybe we still do this, we used to create what was called an AEX file to store your Xbasic functions. If you're doing a web application, what are your options for where to put your Xbasic functions? I understand we have modules, we have classes, and we have things like that. Could you give us just a little bit of an overview, high-level overview?
Absolutely. Okay.
Great.
So when you're doing things like in a UX, you'll notice it has something over here called Xbasic functions. You can actually define and create the functions here, and they're encapsulated and available to just this UX. So it's handy. I mean, if you want to, you're creating a function that's only ever going to be used in that UX, you can put it there. The downside of that is now you have these functions kind of distributed within your different UXs and different places. So I've moved away from that, and this has happened with Alpha over time, is Alpha created this Xbasic area here, and it allows you to create a function library, a module, a class, or just write a simple script. Note these scripts do not get published to your server. They're just local in the development environment there. Now, they're really, you can use any of these three items. A function library is equivalent to that AEX. Basically, it's a set of functions. You have to tell your UXs and stuff of this library. So it kind of, you have to make the UXs aware of it. And again, that's kind of nice in certain situations because you want to make sure it's only exposed to things you want it to be worked with. A module is similar to the node concept of modules, and very similar. It's a way to consolidate your different functions together. Now, those are both powerful, but I really highly suggest you use Xbasic classes to centralize all of your code in one place. There's two reasons for it. One, it's object structure. So over time, you'll find that it intuitively makes sense. If I have things involved with my, I have a thing in there called a customer, and then all my functions around the customer in one place, and I can leverage off that from that standpoint there. The other more important reason is that if you do put them in a class, then you can use our web services capability to wrap that class and provide that data outside through an API. So the neat thing is that if you do all your stuff in classes, you can immediately start exposing them to the outside world. If not, if you've used the library or the module, you have to basically create a class to wrap that stuff and then create a web service. So this is kind of the most modern, the one I really highly recommend. That's what I use most of mine with. And basically you create a class. And then in there, you can have, you don't have to like create a class for everything. You can create one class for your whole application and just inside there, put all the different functions you use for your application. That's perfectly fine. I usually do that. There's a lot of like column glue, glue modules or glue functions. I do that from there. But the nice thing about class is you can really create a true class definition in the object-oriented world, which opens up a lot of really cool features and capabilities, encapsulation and maintenance features there. So very similar to AX, you can use this centralized class capability or modules or function libraries to consolidate your code into one place.
Great. And so a follow-up question to that is, once you've created this class, which I guess probably is stored in some separate file that's uploaded
Correct.
automatically, how
Yes.
do I refer to it in my UX? Let's say I've created this great function in my Xbasic class. Do I have to tell it the class name or load something, or how does that work?
Well, so the cool thing about it is that you don't explicitly need to load classes. So
Oh,
let's say
okay.
I created, the system will automatically on the fly go, oh, okay, I'll go find that file and I'll load it into memory. Although I'm going to come back to that in a moment because there's a very interesting aspect about that, which is good and bad. So,
Okay.
so let's say I created a class. Let's see if I have any class libraries in here. I think I do. I created this one for Spark Post. I was playing around with that. So I'll go into just some code here, and I'm actually in a UX here. So I'll go dim my class as, and then, and so this is the name of the class right here. So you'll notice over here, it's AAF dot there. The way to refer to it, it's called a namespace in that. So you can put like a name in front of it and other, because other people might have that name Spark Post or customer or whatever it happens to be. Now that I've defined that, I can just go my class dot, and then it actually calls and looks at that and says, oh, here are some different things that are inside that class. There's a variable I can reference, there's HTTP set, and then there's also a function called webhook. So this is how you define your class, and then you use it by just dimensioning an instance of it and then referring to it within your code. So very simple there. Now, very important is that, again, when Alpha runs this on the server, it says, oh, you want that. Okay. Oh, is that in memory? Oh, nope, it's not. So I'm going to go grab the file off the disk. I'm going to load it into memory so the code's in memory and then continue executing from there. So it does all that automatically. But I found a really, and this is super important you have to know about, is that that is done one time. It doesn't check to make sure, excuse me, you have the most current version of the class. So for instance, let's say I went into this and I changed and added some functionality. Well, what I will do is I will go ahead and publish that file to the server. I will run my code assuming that that class is loaded and it will break. And this is especially for production environments. So what will happen is that for speed purposes, after it's loaded that class, it doesn't reload it every time. You have to explicitly say reload it. So you have two ways to do this. Method number one, restart your server, because it's going to flush out the memory. And then the first time someone runs this, it's going to load up that new version of it. But if you want to do it yourself in code, you can use a function called load class. And then I can go AF Spark Post. And by doing this, when it sees this, it forces that reload of the class. And then when it runs, it's using the new version that's been up there. Now, the downside is there's a little bit of time. So you don't want to do this every time you use a class, because otherwise you're getting a huge performance penalty. Every time you try to run some code, it's going to hit the disk, wait for the disk to give the data back, set up the memory, and then give it back. So just be aware, and it happened to me so many times before I became hyper aware is I'd make these changes in my classes, I'd publish it, and then things would stop working. It would just be weird errors and like, I have to restart the server or reload the class. Boom, everything just worked. Because let's say I added a new function, it's like my cool function, and that hasn't been loaded. Well, it runs this, it says, oh, I don't know, this class doesn't have that function. I'm sorry, I'm throwing an error. Sorry. So, but if I force that load class at least one time before I want to use the new set of code, everything works fabulous. So again, once you've defined your class, all you have to do is dimension an instance of it. Then you're available to use it any way you want to. But do remember, in production environments, when you're in development, you don't see that happen because development is kind of continually reloading it for you in the background to keep the debugger and stuff up there. So that's one of the deceptive things, is that if I went over here and I edited this class and came back here and ran this function without load class, it would find the new code. But if you're up on the server, it would then not find the new codes. That's one of the tricky parts that throws you off from that standpoint. So that's how to use classes. And again, use them because now you can expose everything as web APIs with those classes, and your life is a fabulous, fabulous thing.
Fantastic. If we could go back to the cascading drop-down thing that you showed before, would you happen to know how to, we did that in a UX, but would you happen to know how to do that in a grid as well?
Yeah, let's go ahead and look at a grid. Oh, you know what? I bet it's gonna, well, let's see.
It's gonna crash. I know. You know, I think people are saying, hey, what questions are gonna make Dion's thing crash today?
I
know. I know I would, yeah.
Okay, I got so far. Yeah, it's like, like, remember the old game? I think it was, it's like Jack in the Box.
Yeah, exactly.
Then Pennywise comes out of my screen and you hear the scream and splattered blood. Watching too many movies. Okay, so let's change this to a control type of drop down. And notice here, choices, dynamic, and you can do cascading choices there.
Okay, so it's the same deal for the UX then.
Yeah. Basically, the UX lifted everything it knows from the grid control and then dumped it. Said, sorry, you're old school. So the similar functionality occurs on all these controls between grids and UX controls, although UX controls are so much better with like PDF viewers and things like that these days. So exciting.
It is.
I'm excited about that feature. I got a lot of environment. PDFs are used so widely for reporting and for capturing information and stuff. It's just super nice to be able to do a viewer right within, your environment. Pretty cool. It's going to open up some new capabilities.
They really do. Back to arguments for a minute. Would you happen to know if arguments are case sensitive? Xbasic tends not to be, but
I found JavaScript is. I would always do all your arguments in uppercase. That's become my standard anywhere I do it.
Oh, and uppercase. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I do so I'll go into let's go to this UX. I'll go to properties, go to arguments. Whenever I define an argument now, let's say I insert a new argument, I go customer ID or whatever it happens to be. I always do it in uppercase. There was an issue on IIS about 8 months ago that arguments, there was some confusion because arguments were lowercase. Things change over time. So just don't worry about the history. Just make all your arguments uppercase and you just don't have to worry about weird things happening. And I think we've kind of cleared out all that. The system automatically does uppercasing now in the background. Like if you have an old UX with lowercase, it handles it so you don't run into problems on certain environments. But just going forward, I would just always make your arguments uppercase and you never have to, it's a consistency thing and it works out nicely.
Excellent. In fact, one of our esteemed application partners who is on the call with us today has pointed out that he thinks now that Alpha actually forces an argument name to uppercase. So hopefully it won't be an issue that you run into. Yeah, great.
Let's see. Yes, look at that.
Look at that. Exactly.
Yeah, and make sure anytime you do an argument, make sure it's not human readable. That will improve maintenance and capabilities at all times. It makes, the cool thing is that it's like a treasure hunt adventure for the new programmer. It's like, ooh, what is that?
I see you have to end with bad advice. All right, fair enough. Well, we have come to the end of our hour. Dion, thank you very much for presenting.
Thank you,
Thanks
everybody.
everyone who showed up today and kept today lively. I see there are more questions than we could get to, so please send those questions into guides, GUIDES at
Sign up for DevCon.
alphasoftware.com. Sign up for DevCon. We are going to probably be taking a couple of weeks off before the next DevCon so that we can get our stuff together. So we're not going to see you for a little while, but you can always send us an email. I'm always happy to get back to you. So
Hey,
thanks
I'm going to
again.
actually shave and get a haircut. You know, even this COVID time is going to be all
You mean
purdy.
this current picture on the screen is not current? Is that what you're saying?
No.
All right, fair enough. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a great couple of weeks. Can't wait to see you at DevCon. Take care. Bye-bye.